Hello.
Hey.
This is Sunday again, but our listeners don't know or really care about this. So for our listeners, it's not Sunday, it's the new episode of Biweeklycast, episode number 27. The hosts are still here. It's me, Dima Malenko.
I'm Slava Rudnitsky, and today we're going to talk about transparency.
Whatever it means.
But before that, there is a follow-up.
There is a bit of follow-up. You remember last time we talked about juggling or like working, overseeing multiple different projects and challenges associated with this, and working on the post-production for the episode. I kind of had to re-listen it once again, and there was one thought which we somehow did not touch in the episode, but that came to me, and I also felt that it was important because my thought resonated with me. Does it make any sense? I guess it does. I think sometimes as managers we have this desire for things to be kind of perfect, for things to go smoothly. So if we are running a project or a meeting or whatever it is, we want that thing to go kind of to flow without major disruptions or blockers or whatever it is. And I feel like at least I sometimes, or maybe oftentimes, have this desire, and this I feel can be very suboptimal when, especially in the delegation-like scenarios, when someone is not entirely prepared or has a little bit different style of working or kind of different view on how to do things. You, as a bigger manager or bigger boss, can see this as a kind of disruption or a bad thing, and you would want to fix that, which can make things go astray a little bit. I wonder if you
Fair enough.
feel the same.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds from different places. Now you're saying this, and just a few hours ago I was listening to Focused podcast from Real FM, and they were discussing a book, How to Be Miserable. And it's actually quite an interesting one. I think I'll give it a try. They suggest that we use a lot of different things that we pushed to extremes. Mm-hmm. Like people ask us to consider risks, but then we live in the most terrible scenario of our life. Or people tell us to care about quality, and then we think that everything should be ideal and impeccable, and we over care or care too much about that. And right now it's like from two different sources, so maybe it's a sign that I should think about it.
Yeah, well, I for me, I came to a conclusion so that I should definitely think about this and see how I can kind of give projects or things I do a room to gracefully fail or stumble upon, so that there is still enough, whatever buffer, whatever it is, to correct and get to where we should be.
So I'll just echo my good friend. Good stuff.
All right. So the next thing that we typically discuss at this point is why this topic. And I don't know why. There was a trigger. I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine regarding the transparency as a thing and as a kind of means to solve, if not all, but many problems, both on company management, execution kind of level, as well, all the way up to governmental institutions and stuff like that. And we had a little bit of an interesting discussion whether that's the case and how it would work or how it might not work. And I thought that it would be interesting for us to, for me to continue this discussion, and maybe for you to join it as well.
There's one thing I wanted to clarify. According to the definition that you suggest on some of the materials, it's mostly about the pay transparency or compensation transparency. But some of the later questions that you put in the outline are more generic. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to ask whether we will go into a more wider, into a wider spectrum of transparency, or we'll focus on the pay?
I think I would hope that we can go wider and then kind of look at more different things, time permitting. It's just, it started for me, like trying to put together notes, started with topic that is more, let's say, articulated, more popular, quote unquote, in current environment, and it was easier to source materials and definitions and whatnot for that topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, to be honest, kind of struggling a little bit finding reasonable or specific enough materials on a wider topic of transparency that I thought might be useful. So yes, the idea, we will maybe try to start with compensation transparency as a kind of starting point, and then hopefully go into broader view, if that makes sense to you.
Sure. And yeah. And by transparency, we basically mean making information available, and in this case, information about the pay raise processes and the salary raise and stuff. But generally, it could be anything else. Reports,
yes,
revenue, figures, specific decisions, results of a strategic session, or whatever else.
Yeah, I think the definition I copied and pasted from Wikipedia about compensation transparency reads as disclosure of employee compensation amounts, either among other employees in an organization, to owners or to government regulators or to the public. And I think the broader definition, how we can extrapolate this to transparency in general, that would be disclosure of, let's say, detailed and specific information about a particular process, structure, or group of something. I guess maybe that could work. And that transparency, I think what's also interesting in this definition, that the transparency can mean being transparent within, not necessarily within the entire domain of humanity or something along those lines, but within smaller groups as well, like within a particular company or group or organization, or with, in this case, as they say, government regulators, or as an ultimate expression of transparency to the public.
So I would say that my overall position on this issue is that there should be as much transparency as you can afford. And by affording, I mean whether people are able to digest the information and they actually need and will check it. For instance, our reports on profit and loss or cash flow or something, many employees wouldn't just understand what they are, and they have to learn how to read those and how to digest the information. The same things about the salary rates. We are using quite a complicated accounting system, and at a certain point, I'd love to give people more access to it, but I think it's just a bit risky now because we don't have the tools how to give just the view option. It's either you can add it or not. So my overall position is for, and I think that it's generally an interesting topic to discuss, because when I saw the notes, I thought, what could be the risks? What could be the worst cases used? What could be the conflicts caused by it? And to be fair, I thought just about a few minor things. And the number of advantages and things for this are way more than against.
And here, are you speaking about salary transparency and salary transparency within company?
Salary transparency specifically, but also transparency at all other levels.
Yeah, let's try maybe explore this. I think with salary transparency, one interesting thing is that, if I'm not mistaken, in California they passed a regulation obliging companies to disclose salary ranges for positions and kind of disclose them publicly. That was not required previously. So this is a change, and people already started seeing some change in how job market sort of functions and what were results of this transparency movements. But I wonder what were the negative things that you saw, and maybe we can discuss some more.
I think the biggest thing is if there is a mess. Let's say the company has been growing for a while, and some people would join the company 10 years ago, and some people would join just last year, and their salary expectations could be different, and the way they there is no pay grade that increases across all the company, but it's just a situational thing where people get promotions and get some raises and reviews of their salary on context basis, like depending on what they do, where they move, what their career is. And if there is a managerial mess, saying people at the same position have quite a big difference in salaries, that could be demotivating to some of the employees, knowing that, all right, I've been here for years, and now they pay newcomers more than they pay me, and it seems unfair, and I think it might potentially cause to some dissatisfaction within the team. But once again, the predisposition for this, or the condition, is that there was a messy system that wasn't sorted out before.
So the risk, if I'm hearing you correctly, the risk is in transitioning from obscure to a more transparent system, right? When that happens, it can be a painful process. Let's put it this way. And who knows what the result be, or at least on the tactical level.
I'd say that managers probably would want to make a salary review procedure to even things up, to get them at least into the range, and talk to people who are underpaid. If possible, increase their rates to the market standard or to the fresh ones, and then come to this transparent thing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So that's count as one. And what was the other thing that you had in mind for this?
I thought about the risks, because people might misuse this information. And when you basically give an opportunity to get to see all the data, it usually includes some confidential stuff. And people are not very good with copyright in Ukraine. Like, we struggle with NDAs and legal procedures, and we talk about stuff. So I would say that when people enter this legally dangerous zone, like if you disclose this information, that would be harm to the company or to our clients, and that might be risky. I feel quite comfortable about it because my total NDA amount is in millions right now. Like, if I break all the NDAs I've ever signed, I will probably have to sell some organs or switch to a different industry. But what I see as a risk is that people who don't know the possible risks of disclosing the information might accidentally spill it out.
Well, I think that happens nonetheless anyways. I think there are at least two sides that I can recall that encourage people to anonymously share their salary information salary data.
I mean, one thing when you have your data point or datum even.
Okay.
But another thing is when you have access to, let's say, hundreds of people. And
right, yeah, I see. What's like that's the privacy concern, right? If you provide transparency within the company, and everyone within the company has access to that most likely would mean that everyone in the world or with internet connection would have access to roughly the same information. Interesting. I was thinking that there are some also kind of structural challenges to being kind of 100% transparent, and when we solve certain problems this way, we create some other problems in different other areas, and who knows which problems are better. And I think I already alluded that to the fact that in California it's been mandated now, and the effects that analysts have seen from introducing transparency was that indeed one of the desired effects of instituting transparency, that it came through the difference between like pay gap across multiple different dimensions, like gender, maybe ethnicity, whatever else. It narrowed just because of that transparency. But also, I think another effect that was observed is that overall, on average, the compensation rates fell a little bit. So even though the gaps narrowed, kind of overall the amount of money that employees received kind of reduced in the process, which was interesting and unexpected. I think one of the, I don't remember which exactly, one of the HBR articles that I linked to in our notes suggested that there are some indications like that. I also think that when if we are talking about salary specifically, right, we cannot publish just the salary figures, right? That would not be considered, I guess, full implementation of transparency. We would also need to disclose the rules by how those numbers are created, how to move, what are the levels, what are the rules for moving between levels, and so on and so forth, which can also lead to additional sort of friction or complexities for handling some exceptional cases, which can be both good and like it prevents some egregiously bad exceptional cases. But I guess that also not necessarily prevents, but makes it more difficult to handle bright or good exceptional cases on in this model, just because we would be so much more tied by rules which are now made sort of public.
Well, that's fair. The only thing that came to my mind while reading most of these 3 HBR articles that you posted is that basically, if there is discrimination in your system, transparency will highlight it. People will be able to track it, to see it, and then it might lead to shame, conflicts, just mistrust, or some other things. But if there is no discrimination, I mean, or it's not that obvious, or it's not striking, then most of those effects are not in place. Basically, most of the articles were just summarized, like people will see if something is wrong, and then it will lead to bad things.
Right, which I guess equally applies to both situations, both with and without transparency as well. And also, I don't know how it happened when I was kind of searching for materials. HBR came more often than any other resource. That they seem to have a particular interest in the topic of transparency. I also felt that other article, maybe you're referring to when the article called "When Transparency Backfires and How to Prevent It." I felt it is a little bit kind of shallow on that, and I agree with your point that people generally don't like things that they perceive as unjust or unfair, right? And that applies to any situation under the sun, because we can be fully transparent with the salary ranges, with the levels and how to move between them, and that would be perfectly fine. But if the process, or if the actual practice of how we apply those transparent rules is bad, people's still going to be unhappy.
But I think the tips that they provide after is kind of counterintuitive, because they say, like, you should explain how data will be collected, emphasize learning, promote forgiveness. Promote forgiveness? Seriously? Like, that's the thing that will help you overcome the risks of transparency. You don't want people to forgive. You want people to speak up and communicate if something is wrong. Not just like, all right, he made a mistake. That's fine. Transparency is actually designed to spot things and talk about them. And then that's what the thing is like. And it's not just in business relationship, in personal relationship as well. I think that I think the word is congruent.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you say what you mean and mean what you say, the easier it is to be transparent. And if there are things with levels of secrecy and accessibility, then it becomes a problem.
And speaking of your company, unfortunately, I cannot speak for my company. For your company, would you consider going transparent on the compensation side, or maybe you're already there?
We are on the way. Right now, we just need the right place to show it, because we were still using this cloud solution that is, let's say, it's not user experience, it's probably user struggling. And I would just hate people going there because it's so terrible. It took me months to be able to navigate there. And I just believe in more convenient interfaces, because if you would like people to see the data, to check things should be really available. And when we learn how to migrate it, for example, to Notion, to make it more pleasant, nice, simple, and clear, then I guess we should do that. Plus, we've been working for a year to smooth things in terms of compensations and salaries and rates. So right now, I can say that things are fair. And if anyone on my team knows rates of others, there is very good, valid reason for that. Like, people who get more are reasonably more skilled, experienced, and they run more complicated projects. People who get less are less experienced. There is a quality control procedure that is fair. There is a grading system that is described, and we've done a lot of work to prepare for this step.
Interesting. Yeah.
Apart from changing the accounting system.
Oh, that's great. Interesting. I would be curious to learn from you when you implement this, how this changes or improves, or like whatever the effects are going to be of taking, I guess, the last step. Because from your description, it sounds like you are operating as if you are ready to push the button to become transparent, and maybe that was the biggest change, rather than actually publishing the stuff. That's interesting. And I wonder, do you is compensation in your company mostly kind of wage, kind of salary kind of thing? Does it have any bonus elements? And I wonder, what are your thoughts on transparency for bonuses? Like, would it fall into the same category as well, or should it fall into the same category?
Basically preparing to open all the charts and the books, so things should be transparent, not just in terms of spendings and costs, but also the budgets for the future. Like, we would like to show it all, like everything we can see and can count. I think that the salary is mostly split. Some people get hourly rates and they work as contractors, and some people get fixed salaries monthly, probably when they work full-time or on managerial positions. I think that the only changeable here is the interest or dividend part of owners of the company, like when they get their interest after the profit is calculated. That's probably the only changeable thing, plus some occasional bonuses or things, but they are usually tied to specific events or things like, let's say there is a big project and people have to do some overtime, and we would just compensate this time extra in spite the fixed salary. We would just want people to leave leave the projects where they work to much happier.
And it is interesting that you're kind of driving this change as a head of the company, right? And usually one of the positive anticipated effects of transparency is on the employees' side, that they will get more fairly compensated for their work. There will be less inequality and so on and so forth. And from that point of view, we can see how it sort of works in employees' favor, at least a little bit. But as a company manager, what are the benefits that you're seeing there? Is it just
basically what we are trying to get to is more adult position from our team, because Ukrainian employees on average are quite relaxed, and they expect the company to take care of them and for them instead of them. And if people would like to get more, we have quite a clear description how to do that. There are multiple projects running. There is a promotion strategy. They have individual development plans. They could always talk to their team leads. And the thing is that they could either work more, like to get more hours, to get paid more. They could work with more complicated stuff to get some highly skilled programs and some things where they get compensated more. Like at first it's special courses, then it's workshops, then it could be something like facilitation of strategic sessions. If they gain more expertise, then they could get more compensated. Or they could shift to some managerial positions, like some people did to our marketing team or account management team or something along those lines. These are different ways to get more. And as a manager, if my system is not transparent, I basically have to keep it all in mind and explain to people and give all the figures. But if they can see it, if they know the career paths of others, how it actually changed their compensation, they can make smarter decisions. And it wouldn't be just like, let me talk. They will give me a number. I will compare this number with my number and make a call. You can basically see a person who was a teacher a year ago and now moved to a team leader spot. How has things changed financially for this person? And then make your decision whether it's worth the hustle.
Interesting. So the idea would be to kind of make it more clear or more evident what's the career opportunities are for the employees, and through that sort of inspire proactivity and kind of prompt them to take their fate, their professional fate into their own hands.
Our plan is actually to tie it to the satisfaction levels of learners, satisfaction level of clients, to show that, like, if you make clients happy, if you provide quality training, then you are better compensated. But it's a complicated system, and to make it visible and something that doesn't require a financial education or deep knowledge of where all the information is to put it all together, we're still working on an interface to make it more human-centered.
Well, interesting that you mentioned that, because I think it's one of the other bigger questions that I have towards the end of our notes. Like, if is transparency, whatever it means, even possible in general? And one of the arguments for why it might not be possible was exactly what you just described. If we make everything available, one may not have enough time to process or digest that, which would, on the other side of that, would essentially mean that some information was not available because it could not be processed, and therefore we kind of lost transparency on that particular area.
I think in this case, transparency is more an opportunity than a fact that most people would use it if they need it. They know where to get it. And quite often for different roles and positions, they are interested in a specific set of information. Let's say an average Savvy teacher would be interested in who are our clients, what's the dynamic of the number of groups and lessons that Savvy gets, like are we growing or falling, what's the quality control standard in the company, like what do we check, what are the other teachers doing, how they're doing, what's the satisfaction rate across the clients, and how it is all related to my money. So basically, it should be a simplified dashboard with an opportunity to go deeper if you'd like. So you could see the average rate per client or the quality control assessment averages by the teacher, by the company across a year or something along those lines. But then if you'd like to know more, there's always a page and you can just deep dive and see how it was done, what are the arguments, what were the comments of people who were doing this work.
Interesting. Well, I guess that would be closer to the ideal or best possible implementation of this thing where one would get, if they're interested in, they can get progressively more details on particular matter and then use it whatever way they see fit for them. And I guess we, on the other side of that, we, I guess, sort of have to accept that they can use this information available to them for better ends, and they also can use it for some sort of malicious purposes as well.
That is fair. But I know when the company is doing legal things and things are fair and everything is contracted, there's not much to fear apart from disclosing some personal information of other people and of the clients. So this is the thing that is kind of still tricky. For instance, when we run assessment for our clients, we collect like emails, names, personal information and stuff.
Right.
And given access to these sort of things, there should be some kind of a red flag when you enter this area saying like, there is an NDA zone here, like there is a risk of negative motivation if this information is shared. Like it's for you, for your decision making, it should stay inside the company. And the way I see it, people who do some things that are either illegal or not fair, they're afraid of transparency a lot. Like they just don't want it to be there. They're afraid that somebody will figure it out. For example, in the pay raise, like if there is an overcompensated person who was just overcompensated because it was easier to keep this person when we needed this person, but now it kind of breaks the entire system and it's not according to the grades that we normally run. And if somebody figures it out, then there might be a conflict and people will be pissed. So summing it up, I think that when things are smooth and in order, it's not that scary. And it's serious work that sometimes might take years to get things in order and not make a lot of exceptions. Basically behaving the way as if you have the transparency. Right now, as a manager, I have to make decisions as if everyone knows what it is. So when the transparency goes online and there is a system where everyone can actually see things, you already know that there is nothing to be afraid of because things are fair, things are explained, things are valid, and things are clear.
Well, that's an admirable position, I would say, and I totally agree with you that, especially in current internet age, more or less, like a lot of private information or private information of this kind, not private information which includes that proverbial PII, personally identifiable information, but other generalized or internal information from companies gets leaked or becomes available to the wider public. The best strategy, I guess, to follow is what you described. Kind of act as if this thing becomes public like tomorrow, and act in a way that will not make you blush when you figure out or come to learn that it was leaked or it was accidentally or intentionally published. I think while I agree with this point, I guess I would also suggest that it's not all roses with transparency, right? Because by making, especially with the rules, I think with different rules and procedures, they can create a lot of complications. Well, they create a lot of complications one way or the other, like both if they're disclosed publicly in a transparent way, or if they are not disclosed. Even if they are not disclosed, we kind of assume that people enacting those rules at least try to act in a more or less coherent way and not to change and bend those rules willy-nilly. But the general idea would be that the more rules you have, and the more, not necessarily the more, just in general, the more rules we have, the more difficult it is to predict kind of aggregate effect of the system moving forward. And I think we discussed this in one of the points events. And it also opens more windows for people, especially with nefarious purposes, to try to game or abuse the system, at which can then be fixed maybe with more rules, which makes things even more complicated and leads to sort of an arms race of sorts.
I think it depends on the reaction of a manager on the misuse itself. Because your initial reaction would actually be placing some procedures and more policies restraining this behavior. But if you have 100 teammates and there is a single case of misuse, I don't think that 99 people should actually get through the trouble and go through the new policy because of a single situation. Because we've had a few cases when people would, let's say, misbehave, not according to the policies. And back in this situation, the transparent communication of the management, like talking to the team, talking to the clients, explaining what is happening and what are our next steps, what we are going to do, why this thing has happened, is probably the best scenario. But then deciding whether we should change something or not. For instance, we were given access to our Facebook page and it was hacked a few weeks ago. I still can't get access to it back, by the way. This is a sign that maybe, yes, we should improve our security protocols, like to make sure that all moderators have two-factor authentication, maybe some more complicated ways to get through it rather than just in text message or phone call. But does the situation when somebody misbehaves, let's say does something bad, or let's take an example. A person who had information about our clients will just contact our client list with an offer of an alternative service, or will just give away our contact list of the customers. And if we hear about that, all we can do is proactively contact our customers, explain how this thing has happened, what are the next steps that we are committing to do it, and what would be the thing. But it doesn't mean that we should close the information about all the customers from all the people who could potentially use it. No, it doesn't. It means that we should probably be just more mindful to what information is there, whether we should actually get the emails of every single customer, or is this information that is relevant to the team? Like, do they need these sort of things? Or all they are interested in is, how is this client doing? What are the services they buy? What was the latest interaction with them? What is the dynamics? Are they growing or not? And this information is probably enough without disclosing the contact info, for instance. So we can just review the procedure itself instead of just closing the part of the information or restricting the way people interact with it.
That's interesting, and that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense to me. But I actually picked another interesting kind of thread in what you were describing here. And you said that, hey, when something happens, the best course of action we can take is, well, actually follow the spirit of transparency and explain as much as we can afford, like what happened, what are the next steps, what are the more distant steps that we are taking, and in general, kind of being transparent about like what's happening right now in relation to this particular incident, which makes a lot of sense to me, but B, I think it might be ever so slightly different, or at least distinct from some other forms or expectation for transparency, like with salaries and related procedures. We would say like transparency means that we publish the rules of the game upfront and we then play by those rules, which this case when with incident management or incident response kind of deviates from that, right? Because we define the rules for this particular incident, and one may start questioning, who gets to decide what are the next steps? Who gets to decide how much information about the incident we disclose, and so on and so forth. So that there can be kind of a shady area as far as transparency goes. Do you also feel like there is some sort of distinction or tension between the two?
I think that things should be just explained. For instance, we have a salary standard, and then there is a person who, for whatever reasons, gets paid more. And if this thing is unclear from the pay chart, there should be a place where people could double check why it has happened that way. Like, what was the bonus or the project or the thing that made this rate higher? Maybe this person is doing some extra job and it's not obvious from the chart. It just looks different. Let's say we have full-time teachers who work for 20K, and then there is a full-time teacher who works for 27K. Is there something for this extra 7K that is included there, but it's just not clear from the chart itself? And then where and how we can communicate it so it's obvious before somebody sees that, asks the question, gets... because people don't ask questions, they just get insulted. That's it. It takes some effort to see something, understand what you feel, come to the manager, share what you feel, get the response, get the explanation. We might never know about this. So the thing is that whether things are valid, like if there is validity for things in the chart, and even if there is an exception from the rules, you set the rules, you change the rules, or you break the rules, but then there is a reason why you do that. If this reason is clear and you communicate it openly, right when you do it, you don't wait for someone to spot it and then communicate it afterwards, but you just do it in advance, then it kind of fixes things, I guess.
Do you think so? So I guess maybe we can come up with ever so slightly more generalized definition for transparency, where we maybe say that it's desired, but maybe not precisely necessary for the information to be disclosed upfront. But if that's not possible or impractical, it is complemented with a way to retrieve information about a specific instance or occurrence of something on request and have a reasonable expectation that this request would be fulfilled. That's a good one. I like it. I like it better than what Wikipedia has for compensation transparency. Well, that's interesting. So looks like we are both ever so slightly proponents of transparency. Would you think of any situations or any areas where you would be against transparency?
I think if business is very changeable and there are no certain rules or set things, let's say I'm running a soft skills agency and everything is very customized. So there are no levels of trainers. It's just different people who came at different time. Somebody gets $100 an hour, somebody gets $1,000 an hour, and there's like a huge variety of things. And such transparency is really hard to explain, and numbers will just mess people because it's not helping to make a decision. It's harmful because it confuses, because this data is not structured. It's impacted by a number of factors, and when you just give access to it, people are confused and they can't really act on this information when they see it. So it kind of doesn't help, but even hurts a bit. And the other thing, if there are a lot of legal restrictions to that, like if you operate in the environment where disclosing this sort of information can be legally prosecuted. These are the top two things that come to my mind.
That makes sense. I guess legal restrictions would be something that, I guess, it just, whatever it is, like regulations or whatever, it may just draw a boundary on how transparent one or company can be. And I guess even if they so desire to be more transparent, they might not be able to. And that's a broader question, I guess, right, for the whole ecosystem in which they operate. The first one is, it's an interesting one. So, like, if I heard you correctly, that would be the case where you're saying that we don't want to provide, we would not want to provide transparency in its quote unquote regular meaning, similar to what we discussed prior to this point, because if provided, it will be sort of useless. One could not base their decision or behavior on that information because it's so much volatile and stuff like that. But can we then turn it kind of one notch up and say that the transparency here would be that there is no transparency? Like, I make decisions, I may or may not explain them to you. If I explain, you may or may not like or understand what happened, and you may or may not accept it, but this is how we roll. And this is kind of basically set the transparency expectation at 2.7% out of 100% transparency or something along those lines. Would this be considered transparent?
I wouldn't name it transparency at all. I would probably say that's brutal honesty, especially if there is something you don't fully understand and you say, like, guys, I have no idea how to count it or how these decisions are made. They're just made randomly. Like, live with that. All your compensation was based on the day when it was discussed. That's it. Like, there is no system, there is no gradient, there is nothing behind this thing. If you'd like to make it, please join the management team and help me out.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so I think we covered it all. We primarily focused on the compensation company related transparency things. I maybe will also point to the early episode. I think it was episode number 13 with Vasya Zadvorny, where we discussed Prozoro and kind of history and the governmental aspect of transparency. That would be interesting for people to check out. And since I promised that we maybe go into broader topics, like on the broader scale, what are your thoughts for transparency? Apparently, on top of everything should be transparent.
I would say that's a very tricky subject, especially after this GDPR thing, because when you are transparent about your information, things that you like, for example, your social media, your blogs, your something, when you talk about yourself, you're basically free to disclose whatever you'd like. But if you are interacting with someone, let's say you and I go to a party,
right?
And is it okay for me to post a picture of you drinking beer at the party because I happen to take this picture? This is the question that I was first thinking about during Aspen event, because they asked to keep things off the record and things that go public should be agreed with all people who are somehow mentioned or who it's related to. Like, if you're posting a picture, ask all people on this picture whether they're okay with posting it. And this is where my freedom kind of ends. And I can be just as transparent as only my interest and my personal information goes. In my social media, in my blogs, in wherever I would like to share something. That's probably it's like the libertarian position a bit, like my rights end where another person's rights begin.
Oh, this is interesting. Maybe if you don't mind, we can do a little bit of a thought experiment, and as we often do, take things a little bit to extreme. So if we switch back to the salary kind of situation, let's say we are dealing with a company that was not transparent, and now it wants to be transparent, and there is a particular individual that gets the pay which is significantly above average or the pay grade for his level, whatever it is. So when we switch to transparent, we are kind of disclosing a little bit of personal information about that person as well, which, given their position, may or may not subject them to negative attitude from his fellow coworkers, or maybe some other things. Like, there, would we consider this infringing on their privacy, or that expectation of privacy here would not be exactly reasonable?
I think the term privacy is a bit different here. If we, for instance, for some reasons decided to give this person or them a higher salary because of some health aspects or personal aspects or relationship aspects or something else, then that would probably cause the problems. If the person is just more qualified, or the market standard has changed, or something else is different, I don't consider qualified as personal information in business-related context. And the thing is that you can't really say how it's going to be perceived. You just give the data, and people interpret the data in one way or the other. Maybe somebody will just respect this person more because you can say, like, well, they have strong negotiation skills. If they managed to negotiate a salary, like, that's really respectful. I should probably ask for a mentorship session, how to negotiate a salary like that.
Good strategy. Yeah, I think that's a very profound point that you're making, that we can, in this context, we make decision to make information or data, whatever it is, available, and after that, it's sort of outside of our control. Yes, we have certain expectations, and maybe momentum of things would pull them in particular direction, hopefully desired direction for us, but by and large, we can only observe what's going to happen and maybe try to course correct along the way.
There's one more interesting edge to this. When we were a smaller company, and let's say we had 12 clients, communicating a business case was a real issue, because if you say, like, oh, we started working with this software company, 500 employees, out of list of 12 clients, it's quite easy to figure out who you're talking about. And if you're talking about some details on how the processes were arranged, or what were the issues described, or what was the solution provided, you kind of need the permission to do that. And Ukrainian businesses don't often do that. Like, we actually communicate to every client, even to get a logo on our team page. But if we use their information about them somewhere, right now it's much easier, because on a list of 120 clients, well, if I say a software company of 100 people, they will never figure out who this is, because there is a list of dozens of profiles like that. But previously it was quite an issue, and it was an issue for me for public speaking. Every time I was making slides, I would have to talk to like 6 or 7 different people, getting approve on the way my slides look like and what I'm going to talk about.
Yep, that's good thing. Good thing, makes a lot of sense. I think one, maybe in a closing remark, would be like from my side. I guess we discussed that transparency is generally has a lot of potential to bring good to whatever the area it is, and maybe sometimes that benefit can be just psychological or something along those lines. Like me being now a tax resident for the United Kingdom, I do receive that's an email which says that your annual tax summary from Her Majesty Revenue and Customs Service is available. And every once in a while I would go and check there, and it would have the full amount of the tax I paid during the year and roughly the categories and proportions of how that money were spent by the government. I'm not sure if it's possible to derive any useful information from that particular report from my individual page, but I guess I take it as a token that this is data which is aggregated on a small scale just for me. But if it's aggregated at the small scale, I trust that there is a method or way of getting that data on the bigger scale and maybe scrutinizing it and kind of checking that the ends meet there and whatnot. And for people who are interested or devoted to that topic, they can use this data and hopefully check it and scrutinize government and drive change for better if something is not right there for you. But even at my level, I will probably not do that, but it's still kind of good token of transparency that I receive every year.
That is fair. And I think my closing remark would be that even though the first thought when you think about disclosing information is that it could be misused, most people still have good intentions and they would use information for the benefit of the company, for the benefit of the team, for the benefit of people around. And dealing with people like with adults is a healthy way to do it. And it kind of provokes them to behave like adults. When you give them the freedoms, the rights, the access, the information and opportunities, that's where things become more open, trustful, and innovative. I can imagine a number of restrictions and examples where it wouldn't work, but fortunately, I'm not working for business where it's the case. And I'm kind of happy about it because I can come with a straight face to every single employee and know that we are fairly compensated this person. And trust me, there is no better way to sleep deep and rest well when you know that things are fair.
Yeah, the only cautionary tale I would add to that we mentioned is that transparency often means disclosing rules and their interaction with real world often are tricky and tedious, and it might sometimes lead to effects that were not anticipated or expected or envisioned or intended. And I guess the bigger the scale of application of those rules, the bigger the likelihood that things may not go as expected if it's not carefully planned or modeled or envisioned.
It is always a risk. Plus, this thing has been quite nicely described in the book that we are going to discuss next time. I think that Netflix was going through a stage of opening the books and the accounting to all the employees, even when they went public. And that was kind of illegal to share such information because it could be used for stock trading and stuff. And I think we could just spend a few minutes in the next episode talking about it more.
Right, and then the next episode, which is going to air somewhere in the vicinity of next 2 weeks, we are going to read and then discuss the book called No Rules Rule about Netflix from their founder, I think, right? Is it?
Yeah, it's the CEO Reed Hastings and the culture expert Erin Mayer. We discussed her book 2 books ago.
Yeah, two books ago. That's right. And I think she also had a position in Netflix at some point. It seems to me. Or maybe I'm confusing things.
That's possible. But I don't know. We should check her LinkedIn. Yeah. If it's transparent enough, we'll see.
Good point. Good one. All right. So then everyone have good 2 weeks. What I'm saying.
Yeah, good weeks.
Good transparent weeks.